What is up, everybody? I'm live with another edition of the State of Bitcoin podcast. But first, I do have a new sponsor. So if you guys want to support the cause, be sure to come in and create a new account on BitGet. BitGet is a place where you can buy and sell some futures around Bitcoin. I even have a new deal for you. So if you sign up with BitGet using the link that I'm going to post in the show notes, you'll be able to get $0 fees for any spot trades that you make. And then you will be able to get a $10 sign-on bonus and then a deposit bonus for up to $100. So support the cause and join BitGet. And I will post that link in the show notes and the description below. And then also, I'd like to thank everybody who's given me a boost on Fountain. So I'm kind of getting delayed here because I'm pulling them up. But I'd like to thank, everybody who listens on Podcasting 2.0 or any of those Podcasting 2.0 apps. If you feel inclined, feel free to stream me some sats. Some of the cool comments that I got were I got a couple from BitGuy. He said he never saw the banning of Bitcoin mining in China like that. Very interesting point. He also said that he is from Europe and the situation is not looking great in Europe as well. So I hope that things kind of turn around for you guys in Europe. And then Jim Zfert, I believe, is he says, I always laugh when people say this is for entertainment purposes only. And so I guess it is. But on that note, I have my first recurring guest outside of people from the chat. I have Pierre Corbin, the director of the Great Reset, and he's also working on another project. So Pierre, how you doing today?
Yeah, hi Brandon. Really good. Hi everyone who's watching.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. So, for those who might have missed our first episode together, why don't you kind of go into the Great Reset and kind of your mission behind creating the documentary film, The Great Reset and the Rise of Bitcoin?
Yeah, so if you haven't watched the film, go watch it. The Great Reset and the Rise of Bitcoin. That's my first documentary project ever, my first Bitcoin project too. And it's about just looking at the state of the economy today based off the principles that Ray Dalio lays out in his video, How the Economic Machine Works. And just looking at what he says and uh, refreshing the data basically. So looking at the fresh data to check the state of our economy today and where it could be heading based off his principles. And then adding Bitcoin in the loop as the potential safe haven that we as Bitcoiners believe that it is. So just trying to wrap this whole narrative in a 1 hour and 20-minute documentary. That's what it is, yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, we kind of got into it in the last conversation, but your background isn't in making films or anything like that. So what was the biggest thing that you learned kind of going through this whole process, and what was the motivation behind just creating a film in general on Bitcoin?
Yeah, so the motivation was just wanting to do something Bitcoin related, and what kind of idea. I mean, I was struggling to find the right idea. I was always into filmmaking, even though that's not, I mean, I studied finance and then worked in tech, so like nothing to do with filmmaking, but I just always really enjoyed, having fun with that. So I guess, yeah, when I had a lot of free time trying to figure out what I could do for Bitcoin, the first idea that came was just to make a film. And I think it was just a very good way to explain all these concepts and all these economic principles that we as Bitcoiners understand and always, talk about and ramble about, but try to make it more open to anyone that is not necessarily a Bitcoiner. I mean, my film only talks about Bitcoin halfway through the film. Everything else is just very general economy stuff, so anyone can understand it. And then once the audience understands it's important and potentially a problem for them, then introduce Bitcoin as a solution.
Yeah, and it was a great film, and it got picked up, by a couple of film festivals. You actually met me out here in the Tampa Bay area for the Sunset Music Festival. So, how did you feel about the response? Because it seems like although it got picked up by, Bitcoin Magazine and a lot of these Bitcoin outlets, it seems like it got, picked up by quite a few other, outlets that not necessarily just for Bitcoin. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the response and the response from, not only the Bitcoin community, but the non-Bitcoin community?
Yeah, so in terms of film festivals, yeah, I was selected for a couple, including the one we met at. And I mean, if you remember, after the screening, there was a lot of questions. That was a bit, and no Bitcoiners were there apart from the two of us. So yeah. I mean, it was better received than I thought it would be by this crowd. Kind of, everyone was pretty interested, and I know that in general, even the organizer, the guy that runs this film festival, he is the one that actually selected my film. He wanted it to be there because it was an important topic, according to him, that other people should watch. So I mean, that's great, right? Because it speaks to like how it's a topic that everyone realize. I mean, more and more people realize they should understand more about. So they might as well try and push some quality content like this. Um, and other than that, yeah, I mean, the film reached over 1 million views. I think we're at like 1,200,000 almost, which is pretty awesome. And it's not only Bitcoiners. I mean, the majority of the views that I have come from YouTube directly, right? So it's not even all the promotion that I try and do on Twitter and all the spamming and all this stuff, right? It's really off YouTube. And I even checked today. The number one search of people that watch my content is XRP. Yeah, so just but this is cool, right? Because like people that search for XRP might watch my film and might realize, okay, actually maybe I should just go with Bitcoin. So that's at the same time, it's a great fact. But yeah, this just gives an idea of how broad of an audience the film reached and can still continue reaching, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think the interesting part of that too is like I think when we were at the film festival, I had to help a couple elderly women purchase Bitcoin, and they're asking me how much Bitcoin do you have, all this and that, and some kind of funny questions to get out. And I just showed them the general Cash App kind of thing, to buy and sell Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, like, are you seeing a lot of that where a lot of people that kind of come in and watch your film, are they kind of associating still Bitcoin with crypto? And or do they kind of see, when you go into the Ethereum versus Bitcoin aspect in your film, do they kind of get it and just ask you about Bitcoin?
No, most people still associate Bitcoin to crypto. And I mean, I always correct them, like whenever someone, friends, whoever in a conversation says, yeah, well, you're into crypto, I always say, no, I'm into Bitcoin, And it's just, I think little by little, people then they're like, oh, yes, that's true, Bitcoin, okay. And little by little, it sticks, I guess. But in general, yeah, people still really assume that Bitcoin is crypto. And I don't know, like it's hard to make this more clear to people. I know that now we're gonna, in the next couple of weeks, we're gonna put out an article that will be Bitcoin is not crypto, based on like quite some good research. So I mean, you'll check it out then. But because I think like a real effort has to be made so people distinguish the two. Yeah, and my film wasn't good enough yet, even though like I really trash talked shitcoins on in my film. There's like a 5-minute scene where that's literally what I do, but still.
Yeah, I know. So that's why I thought it was funny that even though you did trash talk shit coins, Ethereum, and all that, people still kind of search for XRP and other things outside of that. But I teased it a little bit at the beginning. You're starting to work on a new film, so why don't you get into that and talk about the mission behind that and the differences, and I guess the next step after the Great Reset and the rise of Bitcoin.
Yeah. So this first film, The Great Reset and the Rise of Bitcoin, it was really about how we are impacted as individuals. There's a big focus on inflation and where the inflation comes from, because I mean, it all like ties down to that, I believe. And so in my first film, I just wanted to make it clear to people why they should care and why they should pay attention, and they should look for certain alternatives, because the direction we're headed towards is not good in terms of monetary decisions and the impact it can have on people's wallets. And Bitcoin is a potential, solution they should look at and explain it. So now that, in this first film I got the attention of individuals, well, it's important, I think, to also explain to people why it matters in the bigger scheme of things. And by that I mean nation state adoption, and what are the actors that are trying to block Bitcoin adoption, that are trying to slow it down, for what reasons, in what ways, what kind of influences and pressures are being used. And that's exactly what I want that film to be about. With, focus on, of course, everyone around, I mean, every country around the world where this is happening, but a big focus on Central America, because obviously there's El Salvador there, and this is where the actual nation state adoption is happening in the region. Now, there's more, of course, right? There's in Guatemala and Honduras. I mean, there's cities, towns that are growing, that are themselves adopting Bitcoin, but it's separately from the government. The local government is simply not blocking it, yeah, but they're not pushing for the adoption. So the whole idea came from meeting Samson Mao in El Salvador, when he mentioned to me, traveling in all of these countries in the region, that after each meeting that he had, there was someone from intelligence agency in the US that was there just to put pressure, just understand what they were talking about, what he's trying to push, what the government's approach is towards this, Bitcoin nation state adoption that Samson Mao is trying to push. So that's the story, investigate exactly these situations, why this is happening, who is doing it, whether it's a government directly, or the bank institutions, the bank establishment, and their international rules that they said that banks have to follow everywhere, because otherwise they can't transact internationally. And that's the case in El Salvador, for example, where it is very hard to open a bank account, even for Bitcoin companies, simply because you represent a risk as a Bitcoin company, and banks have to follow the international banking rules. So, it's just the different ways how Bitcoin adoption is blocked. And I think there's a great story there, just investigating all of this is super interesting. There's some great people that can talk about this and clear it out, and also bring the whole historical context around it. Why did this influence start in the first place there? And it can go way back to right after the U.S. independence, and how the U.S. started becoming the police of the region, and really made sure there was a Western hemisphere, including Central and South America, and little by little just started pushing their influence a bit more. And it's very interesting history, and I think putting it all together in one piece, but adding the context of today's Bitcoin story, just wraps it up nicely, and can give a good idea of Bitcoin's role in our global monetary space and geopolitical space as well.
Yeah, that's awesome stuff. So it's kind of like the next step, right? It's like, first, why do we need Bitcoin? And then now it's like, all right, nation states that are adopting it. And it seems like, a lot of progress is kind of moving towards that. And we'll get into that a little bit later on some of those stories. But I know you've set up a geyser fund to help donate to the cause and everything like that. So how is I guess we got into the initial receiving of the first film, whether it was Bitcoiners and not Bitcoiners. Are you seeing a lot of support behind the second film, or is the word not quite out yet in the Bitcoin community that you're working on something else?
So mixed, I guess. I reached out quite early to a bunch of big Bitcoiners, whether they're CEOs of some Bitcoin companies, angel investors, and just the influencers, whatever you want to categorize them with, trying to explain them the story, why it matters, why I'm passionate about it, and try and see if they would want to back it. Now, of course, when the price of Bitcoin is 60% lower than it was a few months ago, everyone is a bit slower with it, and I totally get it. And I actually found support from Brad Mills, that so he produced This Machine Greens, and also is working on the Trust film that is directed by Jamie King. And they've also just started a Geyser campaign, in fact. And we got on a call. I explained the whole project, so my first film, what I'm doing, what I want to do, and um, he suggested to start a Geyser fundraiser because, I mean, obviously he's also an investor in Geyser, and it's just a good way to like have this whole Bitcoin story wrapped together. And yeah, so we went with that. There's just a lot of work to be done, and that's what I'm trying to do now. I'm lucky to have a team of researchers that are working with me, that are just, we exchange a lot of stories that we find. They're writing articles, I'm writing articles too. And I'm just trying to make sure that every week we release one article about these topics, and one video about these topics too, just to get the Bitcoin community more interested. For now on Geyser, we have, I think, around 35 backers, which is, I mean, really cool to everyone. If anyone's watching that donated, thank you. And we've raised about, I don't know, $600. Well, it depends on the price of Bitcoin, obviously. So about 3 million sats. And yesterday actually was announced the first round of the Geyser grants was distributed, and I'm happy that my project is among the 5 projects that received the highest possible grant, which is 5 million satoshi. So about $1,000, which is really cool. So we're at 8 million satoshi, which is, well, 8% of a Bitcoin, slowly getting there. And I think that um, at the same time, through the content we're putting out there, there's more and more Bitcoiners that are following. We're at over 100 followers each week. Plus over 100 followers each week. So we just have to continue going after it, and there's going to be more response from the community. But because I think what we're trying to do actually has value, and we're passionate about it. And 3 of the guys that are working with me are, one of them is from Peru. There's also from Mexico and from Brazil. So they're directly concerned by the story too, so they're very passionate about it too. And they're very excited to be working on it. So, it's a great team. It's a great way to be putting this content out there. Now, in terms of bigger funding, we've also got some commitment, $10,000 that will help us to actually start running start the business and start the first expenses, and start interviews, so to put even more content out there, just to make sure people realize we're actually, it's proof of work. That's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. I think people underestimate like how much research and things that went into the first film, and it seems like you're putting in a lot more effort into, I guess, just getting in front of it and putting out more content surrounding the second film. And so yeah, like why don't you talk about like how much research is really going into it? And the question I have for you on your research too is like, is it the more that you research and kind of get into it, is it kind of like just reassuring, or is it making you more and more bullish on Bitcoin going forward?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of research, the way we approach it is, okay, the number one topic is, because that's that's the elephant in the room, let's say, it's US influence in Central America, right? And then relate all of this to Bitcoin. And yeah, that's where it starts, and then try and get stories. And what we do is we list out just ideas of articles, because what we want to do is put articles out there that we also send to Bitcoin Magazine and that they retweet. There's also bitcoinnews.com that are partners, and they're also sharing every article that we have. So, we want to put content out there that can be easily shared by some Bitcoin news platform. And this is, yeah, quite a bit of work, because we always want to have a certain historical perspective and bring it to the current situation and relate it to Bitcoin. So one article, I mean, it depends how quickly you write, but it'll be at least 1 week of work, and there's often multiple articles that are being written at the same time. And and it's a lot of research for them. There has to be conversations with people that can hint us towards a certain direction, certain new topics, things to explore. And I mean, it's fascinating. It's very interesting. I like geeking out onto these kind of topics, and I'm lucky to have a team that also enjoys that. So it's but quite a bit of work, yeah. And your question, what was it?
Oh, it was just like, is it reassuring and kind of
Yeah.
making you more bullish when you dive into these stories, just overall on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it is. So it's always, depending on the story that you look for, there will always be well, one of two sides of the story, in the sense that there is, like in the US, I mean, it is one of the countries that is the most open to adopting Bitcoin, it seems. But at the same time, it is also one of the ones that has the most power to block it. Yeah. So there's these two sides of it. Yeah. And it, like, I think we have to be fair, obviously, in the way we research that, and that's why it's easier though to focus on it internationally, because in the US seems to be quite open to Bitcoin on certain things, but when it comes to outside of the US, that's where they're like more keen on blocking it because of the whole SWIFT system and because of, the control they have on our monetary system. So there's a bit of both, but in general, one thing is certain is that the more you research the history of certain governments and their self-sovereignty and the outside influences they may have had or they have today, the more anyway you realize that Bitcoin has its place in the world. Because I mean, it's just for a country in Central America, let's say El Salvador, that has been abused historically by the US, through these banana republics that were created in the last century. It was all because of resources that were extracted and sent to the US. With Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining and all of the volcanoes that El Salvador has, they can not only improve in their energy grid and have a more abundant uh, energy in general, which we know means a more flourishing society, but on top of that, they can directly mine Bitcoin, and they don't need to export that anywhere. It's just there. It's not something they need to rely on anyone to do. They can just do it there and have money that is instantly, it can be sent to anywhere in the world instantly. I mean, I think it's just a new industry that can give so much power back to a country like El Salvador, or any other country for that matter, right? It's just El Salvador are actively moving in that direction. So I think, it's just the kind of the way of looking at it that tells you, yeah, like it's a good thing for them, like, and it's a good thing for everyone that can just gain a stronger independence, which is interesting, because that's the point of Bitcoin for individuals. It's to, regain your sovereignty, your financial independence, and not, be a victim of whoever decides to print more money or decides to block transactions. I mean, anything like that. Yeah. And this is also true at a nation level, which is a great story, I think.
Oh, it's an outstanding story, and we'll get into a lot of these different, international and a couple U.S. based stories in a second. But before we move on to the current event stories, do you have like an ETA of when you'd like to put out the second film, or are you just kind of still in the planning stage?
Yeah, it's a bit too soon to tell, because right now what matters is to raise some money. Now, I want to do anyway a very kind of agile and iterative way of raising the funds, because I don't think we'll be able to raise all the money at once. I think it'll be more raise a certain sum that allows to move forward with the project, and then with the content that we got there, be able to promote our project some more and get the rest of the funds necessary to just keep on moving forward. Yeah, and I mean, we're already. I mean, these articles that we're putting out there, it's just us opening up our research. That it's research that we have to do anyway to build a story, and it's just open sourcing it kind of, and which is great for the promotion of the project. And what I want to do is be able to, as soon as possible, start already interviewing people. Now, there's a few conferences that I'm going to be attending, including in El Salvador, and that's what I would hope to be able to do already. Just see a bunch of like big names that will be there and try and have their opinions about these. Have short conversations that I can then reuse in the film. So yeah, iterative approach, and then whenever I'll be satisfied with the content that I have, then we can start going into the post-production and the editing and so on.
There we go. All right. Well, when you are getting ready to release it, maybe we'll have you back on for a third time to do a little preview and everything like that too. So, but let's move on to there. There has been a lot of interesting international stories going on right now when it comes to Bitcoin. So, the first one that I want to dive into is the Bank of Russia has now approved for the use of Bitcoin and shitcoins for a lesser extent for international trade. Now, I think this story is super interesting because last week I talked about it with Tone on my last episode that Iran approved the use of Bitcoin for international trade. And so, because of the whole Europe situation, we got the Russia Ukraine conflict and seemingly like holding Europe by the balls, it seems, with this whole like energy crisis. You think of countries like Germany that became really reliant on Russia's natural gas and oil and other things like that. It seems like Russia's kind of going against and just keeps going and kind of pulling against the United States and anything else that they do. And so I think, for me, I think this is probably one of the biggest things that could happen is, first, obviously it got approved, but once trades start getting made in Bitcoin internationally, that could be the end of the US dollar pretty soon as more and more countries kind of start to onboard and use this approach. So what are your thoughts on Russia potentially using Bitcoin as international trade? Do you kind of see it along the lines that I do, or do you see it, maybe as a negative?
I mean, a negative. It depends who whose position we're taking. For Bitcoin, I think it's a positive. I mean, it was kind of bound to happen. I feel it's the kind of conversation, the kind of like rumors that we've been hearing since the start of the conflict. In fact, and I mean, there's a lot of content that was put out there through the past few months from the Ministry of Finance, from Putin himself, from the Russian central bank, just like hints towards them anyway, moving towards that, right? And I mean, yeah, for me it makes sense, because it just allows them to eliminate the SWIFT system, which is ultimately, I think, their goal, right? And it's not their first move towards that. Yeah, like a few weeks ago, there was again more progress that was shared with the BRICS and the reserve currency that they would want to create uh, that would replace the US dollar based off hard metals. I mean, we'll see whatever it ends up looking like. But they have these objectives there, and it's just the way the US dollar is being used is clearly changing. I mean, energy was only sold in US dollar, and now there's Russia and China that are selling each other energy in either of their currencies. Iran just did this, as you mentioned. And even if I think of Egypt last week, I think announced that they were going to create new bonds and were originally going to do them in dollars and ended up going for yuan, right? So it's just the kind of thing that shows you that the US dollar is clearly not the same currency that it used to be internationally. And there's there's the fight. That's the name of my new product, the fight for the US dollar. It's because of all of these situations. Yeah. And I think we'll see what comes out of this. I hope that the stronger currency becomes Bitcoin. But it's all plays for them, right? I think that's where we have to be careful with whether we get excited or not about that. And there's two sides of the story always.
Yeah, I feel like it's just a giant chess match kind of going on between Russia and the US, Russia and China, maybe as well, kind of grouping them together. And it seems like, just like you said, more and more cracks are being shown in the US dollar. And yeah, I mean, I think like, I actually heard anecdotally that, when El Salvador kind of adopted it, it was more so kind of as, like you mentioned earlier, almost like a stab in the back of the United States because all of these countries have kind of come at the hands of the United States. And in order for the fiat system to kind of work, there's got to be winners and losers, right? And so the US kind of seemingly kept winning, in a lot of these Latin American countries and other countries like that kept losing. And I think, this is a sign where Russia and, maybe some other countries are going to start to develop and integrate this. But I'm also kind of wary on this story where it's like, okay, they did it for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, which leads me to believe like maybe that. And I think another aspect of this story too is that Russia is approving it for international trade, but also they still have it illegal for their own citizens to like buy and sell Bitcoin and other crypto. So it's like, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Like it's positive for the space if they do that, but they're also like limiting their citizens for for buying it. So I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of like in between on this story. Like, I think Russia's making a lot of very smart, like, international moves. Like, say what you want about Putin, but um, at the end of the day, like, this is another thing that just kind of hurts the US dollar. Um, I wish that they would open it up for their citizens, but, I guess it all takes time to kind of develop that thing. And maybe they will, maybe they won't. It's just like, it's kind of interesting how a lot of these nations that are adopting it have kind of flip flopped too. Like, I mentioned Iran, they banned Bitcoin mining, like, and then they pulled off the ban, and then they banned it again. And now they approve Bitcoin for use of international trade. So there's a lot of countries that I think are still kind of flip flopping and figuring out which side of the, I guess, pond they land on. But yeah, I think overall, Russia has a plan, and they're kind of starting to execute that, and we're kind of seeing it all play out right in front of us.
Yeah, yeah, but as you say, they're closing it to their citizens. I mean, Russia will remain Russia, I think, at least as long as Putin is there. And the actions that they're trying to take, it's only to benefit themselves and the government, not their citizens, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And then, on the citizens note, we have the Human Rights Foundation donating $325,000 in Bitcoin to Bitcoin core devs. So they released a press release in Bitcoin Magazine. Alex Gladstein, he's the chief strategy officer at the Human Rights Foundation and a very noted Bitcoiner. I know they had like a big, conference in Norway, I want to say it was, where the Human Rights Foundation sponsored it. And part of that was about sound money and sound money principles. But one of the biggest donations is going to 100,000 to BTC Pay Server, which is also in collaboration with Strike's nonprofit. So, what do you think of like the Human Rights Foundation kind of getting behind Bitcoin? Do you think that it's going to encourage more countries to kind of open it up to their citizens as the Human Rights Foundation is kind of getting behind it? Or do you think, governments are still going to kind of, I guess, limit their citizens and try to do as much as they can to stay in power?
Well, okay, so I think this second one is, of course, anyway, going to remain true. I think that it's hopeful for other foundations, because they're I mean, foundations are pretty much in competition with each other, right? Um, I mean, of course, they have all, in theory, good objectives and good goals, right? But it's still who gets what money from what government, and they're in competition between each other. And this is the kind of thing that other foundations are also gonna. I mean, they see it. Yeah, it's a network. They see what's happening, and I think what's good about it is that it can make them look at Bitcoin from this angle too. It's like, okay, so we know that the Human Rights Foundation has been a supporter of Bitcoin through different, I mean, yeah, Alex Glassian, there's other members of the Human Rights Foundation that are also very supportive and work on like big projects to help people in Africa, for example, have a certain financial freedom thanks to Bitcoin, or be able to be banked, the kind of Bitcoin concept, of course. And I'm sure they're well aware about it, yeah. But a foundation that is capable of giving over $300,000 to different groups, I mean, I don't think it happens that often, this way, especially for Bitcoin. I mean, I think it's the kind of thing that can just bring more eyes. It's a big headline, and it's a big headline for people within this industry, and I think that's really cool because it'll just force one boss to be like, oh, they did this. Wait, you two analysts, go and check out what's up with that in Bitcoin. And maybe it will lead them to educate themselves some more and educate this entire foundation that will then do similar kind of things and educate the next one some more. So yeah, so I think it's pretty awesome. Actually, it's really crazy that they would gather so much money and be able to distribute it to Bitcoin devs.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting part about this too is like it's strictly, a donation just so, the Bitcoin devs can live. So because a lot of times these, there's either firms, venture capitalists, what have you, they don't donate, right? They just buy a stake in whatever company that it is, right? So they're like, hey, we'll give you money with anticipation of potentially getting that return back. But obviously the Human Rights Foundation seems like they see like the real positives of Bitcoin, and the hard money principles for, everybody globally. You mentioned Africa, Latin America, obviously we'll get into a little bit later as well. And a lot of these other countries that have kind of been, impoverished, can really benefit from moving to the Bitcoin standard. So it seems like that's moving that direction, and that this is just kind of like another cog in the race here too. So I obviously it's a huge positive, and I think that the Human Rights Foundation doing this is great. But the on the flip note, I think 325,000 sounds like a lot of money. But I think at the end of the day, that kind of runs out fairly quickly. So um, if that could be something that obviously if it's in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin can appreciate and everything like that, so hopefully that can kind of continues. But I hope to see more and more people and more Bitcoiners kind of rally together and help support these devs, because a lot of them are working on like open source projects that they aren't getting paid for. Kind of like like you were talking about, a lot of this work in the Bitcoin community is open source, and it's more so putting that proof of work really behind yourself in the space too. So I think it's a positive, but I hope to see more and more stories like this going forward in the future. But on the flip note too, we also talked about the United States being kind of against Bitcoin and like the adoption. And I think this next story is kind of interesting, and it's along those lines because, Michael Saylor is now being sued by the Washington, D.C. Attorney General. And so, he's obviously a noted Bitcoiner, very big in the space. And they said he's been evading taxes for the past 10 years. They say he's lived in Washington, D.C. Saylor claims he lives in Miami Beach for more than half the year. But what I find is pretty interesting here is that the Attorney General announced all this suit via Twitter thread. So he's making this all very, very public. And so I don't know like whether or not like he expected, maybe Bitcoiners to kind of go at him, or anti people who are against Bitcoiner or Bitcoin in general, and kind of like hate Michael Saylor to be on his side, or what. But I feel like it's all kind of very decisive in that manner, or divisive in that manner. So I'm be curious to hear what your points are, what you think about just overall the U.S. Trying to sue or Washington D.C. trying to sue Saylor. Do you think that it's Bitcoin plays a part in it, or do you think it's just simply like this guy has a lot of money, and the U.S. is trying to get some taxes back in it?
I mean, that's all speculation. Yeah, I think we don't know, right? But I think that if it was just about trying to get some extra tax money, like, I mean, there's other ways of doing it. There's other people you can reach out to. And in fact, if you think of like general government strategy around that, going after the rich people isn't what's usually like done, right? It's rather force higher taxes for whatever kind of bullshit reason to people, small people that can't fight it, basically, right? So for me, it's a media play. As you said, it was done on Twitter. Like, I mean, that's super dodgy, I feel. I think it's just media play. It's just likely to, it's the small kind of thing, because maybe nothing will come out of it, right? Maybe all his taxes were like sorted properly from the start, and that'll be the result of it, although we likely won't hear it as much in the media as that story. Or maybe he did do some tax fraud and has to pay a certain amount. I mean, how much would that be? And he's not going to like become poor because of it, I guess. So like it's I don't think it's that big of an amount, right? But what it is, though, is just an additional opportunity to associate Bitcoiners with fraud, with whatever bad financial schemes that exist in the space. Is just one more blow, one more, repeating this same story again, and for whoever watched the news that day or was on Twitter that day that cares nothing about Bitcoin, and we'll have a conversation about this in the coming weeks, he'll be like, oh, but I saw this big guy, he has over 1 million followers. He's like I mean, he didn't pay his taxes like every Bitcoin guy, you know. And I think that's kind of what the play is here, because it's not about the money. I mean, who cares? And plus, if they actually cared, there's a lot other people they could go after. I mean, in the US, the classic example is Nancy Pelosi and her whole family, right? Like, I mean, go investigate that, you know? But yeah, I mean, that's what I think about it, right? I'm sure we'll never really know, but at least that's the way everyone should um, interpret it, or at least keep it in the back of their minds, because I mean, whether there's some tax fraud or not, based on where he lives, I mean, that's for me. I find it crazy, you know, that in the U.S. it can be a problem between states. That's that's so funny. It's the same country, you know, but just yeah. So it's, as a European, it's a funny concept. Um, but yeah, I think it's not such a big deal, but Bitcoin is a big deal to them.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting that you say that, about the different states, right? So, a big portion of it, or a big reason why a lot of people try to live in states like Florida or Texas is just, the tax benefits. There's no state income tax in those states. States like DC and New York, they have very high state income tax. So if you live in those states, it could be something where it's like 20% of your income is not going to that state. So obviously somebody like Michael Saylor are going to try to do something to avoid that. But exactly what you said. The IRS, announced that they're doubling in size for their agents, a few weeks ago. And I actually had a map in my newsletter where it was like where the audits are mostly performed, and where like the most impoverished places and counties in the country are, and they basically lined up almost perfectly. And that's because, exactly like you said, like the people who have a lot of money can find ways and find tax guys to hire in order to kind of get around these. And so at the end of the day, the IRS is just kind of looking at like how to get the most bang for their buck. And usually it'll be from people that are just like, hey, like, it's an extra $1,000. Like I don't have the money to really hire somebody out to get this. So I'm just going to pay it. Whereas, somebody big is going to, kind of try to find the ways to avoid that. And so, I think it was just kind of a matter of time. I think, it's all obviously, like you said, speculation, but I think at the end of the day, like it is kind of, a little media play by doing it all on Twitter. So, hopefully that these stories kind of slow down, or like maybe it helps open their eyes that are like, okay, that they're seeing this Bitcoiner guy and they're kind of doing a deeper dive into the story. But I don't know. I mean, we'll see where this goes. I think it's going to be something that kind of plays on for a few months, if not years, and we'll see, a lot more headlines around Saylor, and then if there's more headlines around Saylor, it'll be more headlines around Bitcoin as well. But on headlines with Bitcoin, we're seeing Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador receive massive amounts of funding from their government. So if you don't know the Bitcoin Beach story, you're just kind of new to Bitcoin. Bitcoin Beach is El Zante in El Salvador. It was kind of like a circular economy there. A lot of people were just kind of buying and selling, or buying goods and services with Bitcoin and kind of exchanging it on that beach. And that kind of catapulted the start to getting Bitcoin as legal tender in El Salvador. And so now the government is backing all of that by putting a $203 million investment, where it's going to go into, quote, fix an area of about 15,000 square meters, where there will be a shopping center, parking, beach club, treatment plant, and all that kind of stuff to help revitalize the area. So I know you've been to Bitcoin Beach and kind of stayed out there. So, what do you think about this donation from the government, and overall just, the backing that El Salvador has gotten strictly from, the adoption of Bitcoin as legal tender?
Yeah, so well, actually, the first time I was on your show was when I was in El Zonte, just like a few weeks before the Bitcoin conference in Miami. Well, I think so. In El Salvador, there's a whole initiative that is around Surf City, and it's just to bring a bunch of tourists around and so on. And so, when you head from San Salvador, the capital city, towards the beaches, um, there's the first city that you reach is called Puerto La Libertad, and basically there's a big port, there's a big fish market there, and while I was there, they were building how do you call it, like a theme park, and I know, so this was announced like last week or 2 weeks ago that this was completed, right? Which was a big thing there for them, because I mean, there wasn't something like this in the country. And if you go then a few kilometers north towards El Zonte, before that, you already reach a small town that is called El Tunco. And there is the start of Surf City, really. There's just a special road that goes in there. You pass a sign above you that says Surf City. And when you arrive in there, there's a nice street, there's some pavement, there's some shops. You can pay in Bitcoin in many places. There's a lot of restaurants. It's it's a very touristy place. It's very nice too. Good for going for some drinks, some party, and so on. And then from there, if you travel another few kilometers or miles, you reach El Zonte. And in El Zonte, well, there's no road, there's no pavement. There's some restaurants, there's some hotels, obviously, some very nice ones too. So a lot of like small local businesses, but having $200 million for them to be able to, I mean, it's amazing. Like it makes me very bullish on El Zonte, and very happy for all the locals that I could have met while I was there, because like they need it. And it's great for the tourism that has been increasing since El Salvador adopted Bitcoin, right? So I think it's a great way to just stay on this flow. They've increased tourism, increased security. This also increases tourism. Improving the tourist facilities will just, it allows them to keep the ball rolling and just continue with this flow of tourism that is, just brings a huge amount of foreign capital into the country. So it's really cool. I was really happy when seeing that.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned it before, so about the tourism aspect, and so El Salvador adopted Bitcoin as legal tender now, like a year and a day or two over. Now that we're recording this on the 8th, so I believe it was on the 6th or 7th.
Oh yes, 7th, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the 7th. So yeah, a year and a day after El Salvador has adopted Bitcoin as legal tender. And, it hasn't been exactly, a smooth sailing ride, but, a country like El Salvador that's, kind of starting off almost like a third world country, like it's obviously been like a huge benefit. Strictly, if you just kind of look at some of the stats that I have here. So tourism has increased by 82% in the first half of 2022 compared to any other year. And so, that is astronomically huge. And you're seeing like things like this big push to help develop El Zonte Bitcoin Beach. You're also seeing like $50 million worth of remittance payments used over the Bitcoin network, just kind of being poured into the city. So, although, you've seen like the Chivo wallet, the Volcano Bitcoin backed bonds kind of being delayed, you are seeing a lot of positives. And so, what are your like major takeaways from Bitcoin being legal tender in El Salvador for a year? And what are kind of some things that you're looking for, or, that you're hoping happens in the next in year two?
So I really hope that the price of Bitcoin goes back up and stays up. Not for myself personally, although of course, but really for the local economy, and also to confirm that it works. Because right now the price, it's compared to last year, it's dropped quite a bit, including the day one of the El Salvador Bitcoin journey. It's below these prices today, right? So I think it's it's very important to for the price to go up, to confirm that it was a good strategy, and the opposition won't have that much ammo against Nayib Bukele, because that's kind of what's happening, right? There's on one side Nayib Bukele that is pro Bitcoin, although of course it's not his priority, but he's pro Bitcoin and thinks that it can be bring a lot of positive to the country. But at the same time, there's the opposition that uses Bitcoin as an excuse, and they just slam the media. I mean, whenever the price drops, the media is just right at it, saying how, well, they put all this money in Bitcoin, they could have put it in schools, and like, just staying on the high level concepts, not even thinking of how treasury is managed at that, state level. And being able to confirm the fact that it was a good move directly with Bitcoin, I think would be good, because it's easy for them to say, yeah, but there's an increase in tourism that has nothing to do with Bitcoin. It can be we had nicer weather than elsewhere. I mean, whatever, right? There's always a good explanation behind it. What actually would talk with Bitcoin are numbers, because a $200 million investment for the El Zonte area, increase in tourism, increase in energy. This is all like, everything can be related to something else, not Bitcoin directly. So that's, I think, what matters the most. But yeah, other than that, I mean, as long as they continue going this way, it's not like there's, for now, any risk for Nayib Bukele. I feel like he's super popular. He's like the most popular president in the El Salvador history or modern history, and in the region, in fact. So I think what I really look forward to is having this confirmation that would also allow others in the region to really say, okay, yes, we're seeing it, right? I also mentioned it at the beginning, yeah, that like Honduras has a few cities now that just accept Bitcoin in the hopes of bringing tourism. Yeah? So they're kind of going on that part of the bet that Nayib Bukele did. Just the government not yet committing money to it. Well, that we know of, but I guess we would know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like you said, it hasn't really been smooth sailing. And, that's because, we've seen like a 60% drop. And so I think, you're seeing a lot of people, yeah, like you said, jump on them, kind of be super negative because like there's a lot of paper losses. But, at the end of the day, they haven't sold. So is it
Mm.
really a loss? I mean, if they hold on to their Bitcoin and it reaches 100K per Bitcoin, everybody's going to be kind of like jumping on the El Salvador bandwagon. And I think El Salvador is going to be okay. I think, obviously we're seeing like a big, almost like a global recession, hopefully not a global depression, but we're seeing a lot of, issues going on with the monetary policy now. So it's not just privy to Bitcoin. And I think everybody that's a Bitcoin bear just kind of likes to point all these issues on Bitcoin when really like the whole world is struggling. Like every single fiat currency is down compared to the US dollar, and Bitcoin kind of has these, volatile waves. And so, it seems like Bukele is kind of in it for the long run. And yeah, like you said, there's been a lot of positives that have come to it. And I think there's going to be more and more incentives for businesses and Bitcoiners in general to kind of come down and live in El Salvador. So, I mean, as the price goes up, you'll see, more and more wealthy Bitcoiners kind of come and flock around, and then, find places where Bitcoin is friendly. And El Salvador and El Zonte might be one of those places that kind of benefits a lot from that. So I think we're going to see a lot of other countries kind of taking notes on that, and a lot of other countries kind of, doing the El Salvador route. But I think, like you said, it's going to take a price shoot up, unfortunately. As much as Bitcoiners
Yeah,
like the cheap sats, it is a lot of dependence on the price.
yeah, but I'm very bullish on El Salvador in general. I mean, the people are awesome. The place is beautiful, and I'm myself looking to open a business there I mean, where I want to set up the company for the documentary is in El Salvador, just for the whole Bitcoin story. I mean, it's quite a story. I think documenting this is also very interesting. So that's yeah, I'm super bullish on El Salvador.
Yeah, there we go. And then, like we've mentioned, there are other Latin American countries that are kind of getting on board. And so the last story to wrap it up is I've seen 200 businesses in Guatemala are also accepting Bitcoin. So Guatemala is pretty interesting because it's got a similar area to Bitcoin Beach. They're calling it Bitcoin Lake.
Mm.
So it's kind of moving along and moving towards adoption and kind of doing that grassroots movement, but the government still hasn't really embraced it yet. So, do you think that I guess this is going to be kind of the way where a lot of these people, like areas in a country, kind of adopts Bitcoin, similar to a Bitcoin beach or a Bitcoin lake. And then eventually it's, gradually people kind of come in, travel there, and then suddenly the government implements it? Or do you think like more governments are going to kind of start to see the benefits and open up and allow Bitcoin for use of legal tender?
Well, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, like in the months following the El Salvador adoption of Bitcoin, some government officials from Guatemala also expressed their positive attitude towards Bitcoin and that they would be willing to adopt it. Now, for whatever reason, these conversations ended. Maybe it has to do with, what I mentioned, Samson Mao and the pressure that he said that existed over there, because Guatemala is one of the countries that he visited then. But I think, I mean, yeah, I think that given the popularity of Nayib Bukele in the region, given the fact they're neighboring countries, the fact that Nayib Bukele is trying to reunite these countries economically. So Central America used to be one country, right? And then they split because of too many conflicts and all. And Nayib Bukele is the first president that has um, the appeal from the crowds, let's say, to kind of bring them back together, not as one country, but as an economical power. And I think that if the bet works in El Salvador, then these other countries are going to directly from the government are going to start following too, I believe, because I mean, it's you can, if it's your neighbor right there, you can literally drive there. It's a 2-hour drive from El Salvador to Guatemala. Like, I mean, well, it depends where you are, right? But from the capital city to Guatemala, it's 2 hours. So I think it's yeah, it's an easy thing to see. And if the only thing you have to do is accept another currency, like, I don't know. I think it's a no-brainer in a situation where every currency in the world is failing today, right? When you see it, all this inflation means that on the opposite side, I mean, there's prices going up, but the opposite side means that the currency is worth less and less. So after all, I mean, Bitcoin isn't that much worse, I think that's the kind of thought that will start appearing in people's minds there, and yeah, and so I think 200 businesses accepting it is awesome. Just like Honduras, neighboring countries, same thing, are starting to accept it. So it's from the ground up, and I know that the guy from Bitcoin Lake, he was also in Bitcoin Beach. In fact, I didn't meet him; I just missed him. But a lot of people like told me about it when I was in Bitcoin Beach myself, and yeah, and he's really doing something there. And I mean, from what I gather, it's slow and it's hard to get started, but this is just the way of things. It's Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is slow at, progressing. That's what it is. And that's what makes its power. I think it's just like if you want to make any updates on the Bitcoin network, it's going to take time because it's a powerful, strong, and reliant asset. I think that's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot of issues or at least I'm seeing a lot of issues, like a lot of businesses in the United States kind of being a pushback on it because more people are kind of flocking to the dollar. But the inflation aspects of it, a lot of like you said, a lot of Latin American countries suffer from that, and it seems like in the United States specifically, you see that kind of in a smaller level, right? When it comes to recessions, the rich generally get richer, the poor generally get poorer because they have their money parked in assets, and so the rich, generally bosses, and poor employees that end up losing their jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm hoping to see a lot more of these Latin American countries kind of get these grassroots movements, and it is encouraging. And I think Bukele said 2 was his prediction countries this year were going to
Mm.
make Bitcoin legal tender, and we had the Central African Republic make Bitcoin legal tender. Although I haven't really heard much from them since that announcement. And
Yeah,
then
because they went full shitcoin. That's why.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I had Paco from Run with Bitcoin on, and he said that at that time that they were developing their own shitcoins. So,
Mm.
hopefully more of these Latin American countries kind of just go Bitcoin and Bitcoin only. but we'll see. I mean, I think it's positive for that region, and yeah, I look for more stuff going forward on Latin America, and I'm looking forward to your film as well. Help cover that and show a lot of countries around that region. Hopefully skyrocket and prosper in the next 20, 30 years or so. So awesome
Yeah.
stuff. Thanks so much for coming on and giving me your time. So Pierre, as always, it was a pleasure. Why don't you tell everybody, what you got going on and where they can find you?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, we're like really working on trying to put some content out there that can allow people to follow the story of the film as we're building it through articles, videos, and we're really trying to get some exclusive outlook there, and just spread as much info as possible. So just follow us on Twitter. I mean, you can follow me directly. I retweet everything, but you can also go follow the Great Reset Films. And we're getting quite a bit of traction, and that's where we share everything about the fundraiser, but about our research and so on. So yeah, go find us there.
Yeah, follow him on Twitter too at Pierre Corbin. So be sure to do that, and I'll link both of the Twitter profiles in the show notes and the description. So be sure to check those out and donate if you have some to the Geyser Fund. Help Pierre, catapult this project forward and get it rolling. So Pierre, thanks so
Yeah.
much.
So if I can add also something there is that we have from the Geyser fundraiser we have two KPIs. One of them is how much we actually raise. The other one is how many people donate. We have one guy that donated literally 1 sat over the Lightning Network. I mean, in terms of value, it's almost nothing, but in terms of support, it's huge. So like, if you even have 1 sat to spare, please donate.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, get those numbers up, get the number of supporters up, and the first film obviously was phenomenal. So be sure to support that and help Pierre get the word out on Bitcoin.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brandon. Thanks for having me, and I'll talk to you very soon, man.
Yeah, of course.